Good morning, everybody. Lee Brower here, and welcome to this week's edition of Meaningful Monday. I am grateful to be here, and I am glad to be here. You know, I was born in Southern California. I played football in Southern California, both in high school and college. So is there any wonder at all about whether or not I'm an LA Rams fan? I was so glad to see him come back to Los Angeles, and I'm going to leave it at there. Okay? But even though I was a Rams fan, my favorite player, and probably my favorite player of all times, in the late 60s and early 70s was a player for the Chicago Bears, and that was Gayle Sayers. Gayle Sayers they called the Kansas Comet. He set all kinds of records, was consensus All-American several years, and was drafted number 4 overall in the first round of the NFL draft by the Chicago Bears. He went on in his rookie year to break all kinds of records. He ultimately became the youngest man ever to be elected to the NFL Hall of Fame at age 34. Now, it's more about who he was. Even though to watch him was a thrill, and when he was playing on the other side on defense, you had Dick Butkus, how could you not be interested in watching those two play? If they're before your time and you have the opportunity, watch some highlights. They're unbelievable. He wrote a book, an autobiography, and its name of it was I Am Third. And what he meant by that was God is first, others are second, and you are third. So that's the way it was, G-O-Y, and I call that joy, softening the G a little bit. God first, others second, you third. And so you'd have to explore the relationship that he had with Brian Piccolo. So let's look at his career. His career was completely different. He was in college and he was a workhorse. He had to fight for every yard he got. He had to fight for every position that he got to play for starting. And he was a walk-on, to the Chicago Bears. He was not drafted. He was a free agent. But thinking of this concept of GOY, or joy, or God first, others second, and you third. Brian Piccolo, when he was at Wake Forest, they were playing Maryland. Maryland had on their team a guy by the name of Darrell Hill. Darrell Hill was the first Afro-American to play in the ACC. And of course, the only African-American on Maryland's team. The Wake Forest crowd booed him horrifically, shouting all kinds of things that they should not shout. Brian Piccolo walked over to the other side of the field, up to Darrell Hill, and said, "Please accept my apologies for the rudeness of our fans. And would you walk with me?" And he walked him across the field out to the center of it in front of the student section from his school, from Wake Forest. And he stood there with him and he put his arm around him. And the crowd's quiet went down. The jeering went away. And in that one moment, that one act of love, that one act of putting others ahead of himself, because how much courage did it take for him to walk across and to do that? So impressed with that. Well, he ended up being Gayle Sayers' roommate at the Chicago Bears. And they were the first interracial roommates ever in the NFL. They went on together. Gayle Sayers got injured. Brian Piccolo nursed him and helped him and got him back. They started together in the backfield. And eventually, about 5 years into it, Brian Piccolo just scored a touchdown with Atlanta. He came off. He says, "I don't know what's wrong, but I'm totally out of breath." Long story short, got him to the hospital, checked him out. He had advanced cancer. It had already filled the cavity of his abdomen. Several months later, because of his comeback and everything that he had done, Gayle Sayers was awarded the George Halas Courageous Player of the Year Award. And in accepting that Courageous Player of the Year award, he stood up, and these are part of the words of what he said. He said, "You've given this award to the wrong person. The person that deserves this award is Brian Piccolo. I love Brian Piccolo, and I want you to love Brian Piccolo. And tonight when you hit your knees, I want you to ask God to love Brian Piccolo too. Now, you know, I think about sports players as heroes, and everybody says we shouldn't have them as heroes. But you know what? There are some great people in every area of our lives. They're all around us. They surround us. And they're those people that have joy, that put God first, others second, and ourselves third. You know, if we could regain that as a country, it starts by regaining it with the people that are closest to us. It starts with regaining it with those that we can reach out and touch. But we complain about it being absent. We need to re-enthrone, or can we? Can we? We don't need to do anything. Do we get to re-enthrone these priorities in our lives? I'm counting on you. There's so many of you out there that I know that live a joyous life. So many of you. Thank you for that, and thank you for inspiring me. Together we are better. I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you for spending this time with me.